America, we got to get back to doing what's expected of us as free citizens in this democracy. That means being tolerant, being respectful, staying informed, and being engaged. I'm former Congressman Joe Walsh. Follow me here and join the millions of Americans who are renewing their social contract with each other. The social contract, it's on us. Hey, former Congressman Joe Walsh with you this Friday, another week coming to an end. Hope you are all well. Hope you've had a good week. I can't tell a lie. It's my fatal flaw. This former congressman comes to you this Friday enormously concerned. I'm not going to say depressed. I'm going to say afraid and concerned because I feel like I fear right now that the man who I believe is utterly unfit to ever be president of the United States is winning right now. Electorally. And this just scares the living you-know-what out of me. I've been out there damn near every day in battleground states talking to voters every day, and I worry. So when I worry about this, I always want to bring back someone who will maybe help alleviate my fears, calm me down. That's my favorite polling analyst, pollster analyst, guru, polling guru, Carl Allen. There he is. Follow him on Twitter at Real Carl Allen. My favorite pollster in the country, my favorite polling analyst, my favorite contrarian polling guy around. Carl, also author of the book that came out a couple weeks ago. The book is, put it up there.
You know I got it.
I know you have it. Carl, you sleep with it.
Wrong.
The polls weren't wrong. The polls weren't wrong. There it is, the name. Go out and buy that book. It's a big book. It's a great book. You'll love it. The Polls Weren't Wrong by Carl Allen. Yes, I know you've always got it, Carl, and I know you probably do sleep with it.
Hey, it just hit number 3 in political science.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, so I was trying. It was the number 1 in statistics for a very, very, very long time. I'm proud of that. My goal with this book is not just to calm you down, Joe, although that's a nice side effect. My goal is to educate people about how polls work and see past the nonsense of this daily onslaught that we're getting of misinformation about how polls work. Oh God, partisan pollsters. We're going to talk about that today, I'm sure.
Boom. I want to go
so much. So much.
And I want to get into this, and the context, my friend, is this. I'm not you. I am no analyst, and I'm no polling guy, and I'm no expert on anything. I'm just a former Republican congressman who's out there every day campaigning for Kamala Harris. And Carl, I've sensed in the last week or 10 days a shift toward Trump. I've sensed a stalling of Kamala Harris on the ground, purely on the ground. Okay. And I've sensed and this scares me, I think right now the election's held tomorrow, he wins electorally. Now, I have a feeling you disagree with all of that, with your expertise.
Sure.
For all, and let's begin, but I want to give our listeners a context who did not listen to us a couple weeks ago. When I asked you to handicap the race 2 weeks ago, I think you handicapped it at 66% shot odds for Kamala Harris to get elected. That leaves 34% odds for Trump to get elected. Yep. Let's start then with this question, Carl Allen. Where is that handicap number now for Kamala Harris? And do you agree with me or disagree with me that Trump is either winning or things have moved in his directions? Start there.
Yeah. So the race in the past 2 weeks effectively has not moved. About a week and a half ago, things were looking slightly more favorable for Kamala Harris. In my forecast, she bumped above 66%, close to 70. In the past week, she's kind of nudged back down to 66%. She still has edges in the blue wall states. She still has a very, very good chance of flipping North Carolina, holding Georgia, keeping Nevada. Arizona is still well in play. And we can talk about the numbers more if you want, because they are pretty interesting. But ultimately, whether you believe my forecast that has Kamala Harris at 66%, whether you prefer to look at 538 or Nate Silver, when I tell you that the race effectively hasn't changed in the past 2 to 3 weeks, my forecast, Silver's forecast, 538's forecast, all are basically flat in the past 2 to 3 weeks. And even though I am more bullish on Harris's chances than they are, for very good reasons, the vibe shift is coming from this onslaught of partisan polling and misinformation, this messaging that's being pushed out from the right.
Stop there, Carl. Stop there. Let's stop there.
Yeah.
So again, give me a yes or no answer on this, and then I want to get into what you just said.
Yeah.
I've felt a shift toward Trump in the polling. Do you agree or disagree with that? That there's been a shift toward him?
I very slightly agree.
Very slightly agree.
Very slightly agree. Yeah. I mean, we're talking 0.1% in the polling average. So remember, first lesson that I talked about 2 weeks ago, and then I'll repeat it again this week. Individual polls tell us very little. It is always better to zoom out, look at the big picture, look at a polling average. And if you look at the polling averages, things really have not moved more than a couple tenths of a point. That could be a good sign for Trump. That could be noise. But at the end of the day, we still have to look at that average. And Kamala Harris she's not doing as well as maybe we would hope. 66% in my forecast, 55% in 538. That's not as strong of a number as we would hope.
Has she, Carl, has she stalled? If you sense a slight shift toward him, does that then mean that she's stalled?
No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't at all. Because remember, there's two games that these campaigns are playing. One is the media game. The other is the turnout game. Because we're inside of a month to the election. People are already voting.
Yeah.
I live in Ohio. I requested my ballot. I have it upstairs. I'm going to mail it out on Monday. People are already starting to vote. And Republicans have a very strong messaging system through Trump, through Elon Musk, through their very strong base. They are messaging very effectively. The goal is to convert that into votes. Democrats, in my opinion, when they're holding rallies with Barack Obama and even Liz Cheney, these people like yourself on the ground, we're trying to convert votes. We're not trying to change minds at this point. We're trying to get people to the polls and go vote. And there's two different strategies there. Both are important, but ultimately, we have to convert these likely voters into voters.
So Carl, then again, just that one headline, Carl Allen, who 2 weeks ago pegged her number at, she's got a 66% chance to win. 2 weeks later, you've got it right back to about that 66% chance.
Yeah,
okay.
She crept up, and then now she's back at 66%, and I'm very comfortable with that number. Yeah.
Let's get into this issue of the and I'll push back a little, and I'm pushing back with ignorance because I don't understand it. You talk about the Republicans flooding the zone with very partisan polls that then change the aggregate polling averages that, many of these analysts use. What is it? Is that a real thing that Republican partisan pollsters are flooding the zone, impacting the averages?
It is a very real thing, Joe. In my book, so my book came out before the 2024 election, or my book was finalized before the 2024 election was really in full swing. Joe Biden was still considered the favorite to be the nominee at that point. And I put in there, I said, partisan actors understand the impact that poll averages have on the psychology of folks like you and me and the general public. They know that they can manipulate public opinion. They can manipulate how people think about the election by influencing these numbers. I saw it in 2022. In 2022, more than half of the polls making up the 538 polling average in very many Senate races were partisan polls.
Can I stop, Carl? Can I stop you?
Yeah, yeah.
Let me ask the obvious stupid question. Isn't every poll a partisan poll?
Not exactly. Not
Explain that.
exactly. Not exactly. Yeah. So when pollsters contact the public to get their opinions, there are different strategies that they use to reach those people. But on the back end, when you weight the data, there are different likely voter models that they use to say, okay, from this sample, these are the people we think are going to vote, and this is how it would play out. And on the back end, numbers typically move 2 to 3 points depending on that likely voter model. Partisan pollsters tend to nudge the numbers in favor of their preferred candidate. Republican partisan pollsters are extremely active. Through about 2016, 2018, there were a lot of Democratic partisan pollsters that were releasing polls publicly. Now there are very few. So the Republicans have this edge, but only in public opinion. They're not actually generating an edge. They're just kind of nudging the numbers 1 or 2 points in their preferred candidate's favor.
Why do Nate Silver, 538, anybody else, why don't they factor in partisan polls? Why do they use them then?
Yeah, so there are a few ways to account for it. One way to account for it, 538 and Nate Silver call it house effects. Basically, they take the poll for what it is, how the pollster reports it. They take the poll for what it is, and then they kind of nudge the numbers down 1 or 2 points to account for those house effects.
Got it. Okay.
That's one way to account for it. The problem with that is if the partisan pollster is overstating by 2 or 3 a candidate's number, and then you reduce it by 1 or 2, you're still allowing these numbers to influence your averages. And in the case of 2022, like I said, more than half of the polls in some of the states were partisan pollsters. So there was this huge risk of allowing partisans to basically make your poll average, when in reality they were boosting all of the numbers for their preferred candidates. We saw it with Oz, we saw it in New Hampshire, we saw it in Arizona.
Are these partisan polls as prevalent now as they were in 22?
They are more prevalent. The only difference is now in 24, there are more independent pollsters who don't necessarily they might have a partisan lean, like internally, everybody's biased, right? But when good pollsters weight their data, they do it according to a set of transparent standards and say, okay, this is the methodology we use, and they use that consistently. Whereas partisan pollsters kind of fudge things over the election cycle to make the numbers look more favorable for their candidates.
And just, I know you said this, but just to clarify, Carl, there are an inordinate number of Republican partisan polls out there now, but there is not the equivalent of Democratic partisan polls out there.
Correct. Not even close. And in my analysis, I say that we have to account for that as analysts. Nate Silver believes that polling is a free market, and that he thinks that the reason Democratic pollsters don't release numbers more often is because the numbers must not be favorable for their preferred candidates. Otherwise, they would release them. And that doesn't quite make sense to me. That doesn't really fly. But then we saw in 2022, what happened is a lot of Democratic candidates outperformed. I have to use quotes because to me it wasn't unexpected. To him it was. But if half of your polls are Republican partisan pollsters, yeah, it might happen that Democrats appear to outperform their poll numbers. But in reality, if you had properly accounted for that partisan flooding effect, the polls were very accurate in 2022, and that's what I saw. And we have to be mindful of that, and we have to account for that again in 2024.
Then last point on this before we get into the race.
Yeah.
What is the answer? And give me a short answer, Carl. What is the answer to this problem of partisan polls? Is it just to ignore them? What is the answer ultimately? What do we do with them?
We have to account for them. That's the short answer. We have to account for them. When you're doing research on any topic, whether it's sports, whether it's medical research, whatever you're doing, you have to account for all of these different variables that could influence your data.
Okay.
And when I see partisan data, I don't always discount it. Some partisan pollsters do good work in terms of contacting people and getting good responses. But sometimes on the back end, they nudge the numbers a couple points in a way that I wouldn't necessarily agree with. Whereas other partisan pollsters are legitimately just
Got it.
putting numbers out to flood the zone and influence
Okay.
these poll averages. So we just have to account for it. We just have to account for it.
That voice belongs to my favorite pollster, Carl Allen. Find him, follow him on Twitter at Real Carl Allen with a C. There it is, at Real Carl Allen. There's the book. The polls weren't wrong. Buy that book. It's a great book. It's a great study. It's a textbook of polling. Thank you, Keith. There it is. The polls weren't wrong by Carl Allen. All right. Let's get into this, Carl.
Let's do it.
So I worry about a shift toward Trump. I worry that he's winning. You measure a slight trend toward him, a shift toward him. Let me ask you a series of questions here. Take away the horse race calculations. Is there anything about Harris specifically in your mind, in your work? Is there anything about her specifically that is trending negative? Favorability, perceptions on immigration, the economy. Is there anything about her that's trending negative?
Honestly, the only thing that I could see that is consistently or somewhat working against her is that she's a woman. Women overwhelmingly, or not overwhelmingly, but in strong numbers are supporting Kamala Harris. And where Joe Biden was very strong in 2020 in these kind of communities, and I'm from Ohio, so in Northeast Ohio, there are these manufacturing communities, union communities. A lot of white men voted for Joe Biden who maybe would be a little less likely to vote for Kamala Harris. So there's two ways.
And actually, just to buttress that, Carl, correct me if I'm wrong, I think Obama did pretty well with those voters too.
Obama did extremely well in those communities. And I live near one of the Obama, Trump, Biden counties, Montgomery County, Ohio, and there are a lot in the Northeast as well. These are the counties that Sherrod Brown won very comfortably when he was reelected last time, and that Donald Trump won when he kind of flipped Ohio from a swing state to a red state relatively comfortably in 2020. So these are the swing counties that we're looking at. And for Kamala Harris to do well there, my recommendation to I'm nobody, right? Joe, maybe you can put a bug in someone's ear. Get Tim Walz out there changing tires for people and shaking hands in these diners, and to get more momentum for the campaign.
Oh man,
Kamala
Carl.
Harris, yeah,
totally. You're so spot on. Like this was when she picked Walz. To me, I said, like, this is the only value for that guy. He's a Midwest guy. He's a hunter. He's a fisher. He's a teacher. He's a regular guy.
He's a real guy. Yeah.
Get him out in the Midwest. But like, they haven't done that. And he hasn't come across that way. It's weird that they haven't done that.
Interesting. Yeah.
So you're in your mind, anything trending against her may be her gender. She's a woman, and she's not at the same level with a lot of these working class guys that Biden and Obama was at.
Yeah, that's the only thing that I've seen. The two ways to account for that: one, hopefully do what you can policy wise to win back those voters. Two, boost your numbers elsewhere. And I think there's a very, very good chance that she does. Obviously, abortion is on the ballot in very many states. That is a major, major issue for a lot of people. Ohio, for example, with issue 1, and I think it was 2023. It was a weird off year, but in huge numbers turned out to support to oppose the abortion ban. And I think the same thing is going to happen in Florida. And so if there's some hidden turnout within the Democratic Party among these voters who maybe aren't considered likely voters, there's a very, very good chance they lean Democratic. So there's a lot to this row effect. where it's very hard to find these passionate but people who don't always vote, if
There's
that
a
makes sense.
huge, right, Carl, there's a huge gender gap in this race, right? I mean, Trump's
Huge.
kicking ass among men and she's kicking butt among women.
Yep.
But I worry, Carl, to your point, and I don't know if you see this in the data, she really seems to be losing male voters.
Yeah, I mean, not in numbers that would be overly concerning to her chances to win. But yeah, I mean, obviously, it would be preferable if she was doing better with men.
Yeah,
That would make it kind of a blowout territory if she won men in the same numbers that say Barack Obama did. We would be entering blowout territory, and unfortunately, we're not there. But
yeah,
the numbers that she is turning out, the numbers that she are turning out, I don't know what she is doing.
she is.
What she is doing and what the campaign is doing is making her very competitive. And to her credit, again, this media blitz that she's been doing in the past week or so, targeting a lot of younger people, targeting women especially, going on these podcasts, going on The View, not just boosting her base, not just getting her base to turn out, but hopefully turning out a lot of these less likely voters as well.
A similar question, Carl, about Trump. Can his favorability scores at this point even move?
No, sir.
No?
No, sir. I just wrote an article recently about the Maga ceiling. The Maga ceiling is real. In 2016, when Trump won, he won at 48%. He won by getting 48.5% in all of these swing states because third party turnout was so high, that kind of lowered the bar. In 2020, when he lost, his numbers actually went up to like 48.6, 48.8, 49 in Georgia and Arizona, but he lost because you can't win with 49% if there aren't any third parties on the ballot. So looking at 2024, is there a chance that he gets to 50% in states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin? Yeah, there's a chance. But if you're a betting person, if you're looking at things probabilistically, who is more likely to get to 50% in these states? It's going to be very, very hard for Trump to continue to turn out his base 47, 48%. And then on top of that, convert enough new voters and not alienate voters that he's going to lose
That's an
to get to that 50% number. So the election's going to be close. There's not going to be a 6-point victory in Pennsylvania, might not even be 3 points. But at the end of the day, if we're trying to, like what I do, handicapping, forecasting, and I'm saying, okay, who is more likely to get to 50%? That is kind of an easy calculation because we have data from 2020, we have data from 2016, 2022 helps that to an extent, but we know MAGA has a ceiling. And so in order for Trump to win, he has to break through that ceiling. Not impossible, but I don't think it's even money.
Yeah, you're right. 16, he was 47, 48%. 20, he was 47, 48%.
Yes, sir.
You could put your money on the fact that he can finally blow through the 50%, or to me, it's more likely he's at his ceiling.
Yeah.
And you don't have, we had the third party in 16. We really didn't have a third party in 20, correct? And
correct.
really
I think Jorgensen got 1 or 1.5% nationwide.
And we kind of don't, but we have more of a third party presence this year than we did in 20.
When Kennedy was on the ballot, and I wrote about this when it was happening, I said Kennedy is polling at 10%. He's not going to get 10%, but I said if he gets 5%,
yeah,
and he lowers that bar, right, that finish line 50%, you win. But if he lowers that bar to 48, Trump has a much better chance because his base is so strong, and he will turn out 48% in most swing states. But with no Kennedy on the ballot, we're looking at maybe Jill Stein as the strongest third party candidate. I would be shocked if third parties got 2% nationwide. It might not be 1%.
You're right, Carl, except, and I don't know, I'm forgetting in what states in particular he's still on. You know, in many of these states, he is still on because he tried to get off too late. In fact, I think he is on in Michigan.
Yeah, go ahead.
Carl, has there been any information, new information in the last couple weeks that would justify a substantial shift in preference?
Not really.
Nothing
Not
you've seen.
really. The Trump base, we know who they are. They're going to turn out in big numbers. The anti-Trump base, we know who they are. They're going to turn out in big numbers. And every single swing state is going to come down to that 5 to 10% swing voter, people who don't always vote, or people who always vote but don't know who they're going to vote for yet. People who voted for Obama and then voted for Trump is a huge subset. And converting those votes is the key. But there's not been a significant shift in the race. There's not been any major events to cause a significant shift in the race, because Trump's going to get a ton of negative media. He's going to do a ton of
Then
bad things.
what?
But that's not going to change many people's minds at
Then
this point.
I keep beating you for an answer, and I'm not getting an answer. Well, I am getting an answer. I'm nervous, Carl. Carl, I'm nervous.
Yeah.
I've sensed in the last 2 weeks a shift toward Trump. You have said, and I appreciate your conservatism on this, you have sensed a slight shift. What new information in the last 2 weeks would translate into any positive shift toward Trump?
Not so much a positive shift towards Trump, just more voters stating that they're undecided. Trump's numbers have gone up 0.1%, and Kamala's have stayed basically flat. So again, she was already in a strong, or not, I wouldn't say a strong position. She was in a better position than Trump 2 weeks ago, and her position has not really changed, which isn't a concern necessarily. But now we're getting to the point where it's time, like I said, to turn out those voters. So there's not really been anything to shift the race. And here's what I've been seeing, Joe. Whenever I talk to people about poll data, I try to figure out how people think and how I can explain things better. And I think I've made a little bit of progress in this, okay? So give me about 30 seconds and I'll explain it. Whenever there's a new poll, whenever a new poll comes out, in the mind of a lot of people, that poll replaces whatever poll or polls had come before as the newest data, as the most accurate data. And that replaces all of this previous information that you had. And you say, oh, this new poll is good, this new poll is bad. And the vibe shift is extreme.
Yeah.
The vibe shift is extreme. And what I have to remind people is an individual poll can only tell you very little. So I'm trying to get people away from that mindset of this most recent poll that we looked at is the most important, because the bad polls that have come out recently for Kamala, the Quinnipiac poll, well, it was very good for her in Pennsylvania. She was at 49% in it, I believe. And Pennsylvania was her weakest of the blue wall states. So if you put these numbers in the average, her numbers get a little better in Pennsylvania, a little worse in Wisconsin and Michigan, and across the board, she's basically in the same position that she was a week ago, 2 weeks ago. So what I have to remind people is, don't let an individual poll skew your perception of the race, whether it's an A+ pollster, whether it's a partisan pollster, because each individual poll is a very, very small part of a much bigger picture. We have to zoom out.
And don't be heavily influenced by the latest poll.
Big time. The latest poll, small piece of information, good, bad, small piece of information. I tell people this a couple weeks ago when polls were coming out, having Harris at 50, 51 in various swing states. I'm like, guys, this feels nice. Remember, small piece of data. When polls are coming out with Harris at 47, 48 in various swing states, guys, small piece of data. Throw it in the average, relax, zoom out, because the bigger picture shows, yes, it's a close race, but we should expect a close race. Something very, very interesting, actually. Can I talk for about 30 more seconds about forecasting?
Fuck yes.
Very, very, very interesting thing that I started thinking about. I'm 34 years old, Joe. The first time I voted was in 2008 when Barack Obama ran for president. In my lifetime, I have not been eligible to vote in any election, any presidential election in which the Democratic candidate was not a strong favorite. Barack Obama 2008, Barack Obama 2012, Hillary Clinton 2016, Joe Biden in 2020. Universally, these Democratic presidential candidates have been considered strong favorites at every single one. That recency bias is messing with a lot of people because Hillary lost in 2016 as a strong favorite. And people say, well, Hillary can lose, anybody can lose. Not necessarily. We have to have an understanding that these races are going to be close. I think historically, the past 4 presidential elections, we've kind of, as people who supported Democrats, we've been expecting a blowout. We've been expecting an easy election night. We've been expecting not a lot of drama. 2016 was very, very close. Hillary Clinton won.
2020 was very, very close.
2020 was very close. Joe Biden won. If we go into this with the mindset that it's going to be close, believe it or not, that will reduce our anxiety.
That's a Carl. That's a great point. That's
yeah.
A great point.
Opposed to if we go into it expecting a blowout and then, oh crap, it's close.
Two final questions for you, my friend. Frank Luntz, who I'm no fan of, tweeted something yesterday that said something like, "Oh, Kamala's spent $1 billion and it's a tie. What a waste." Is there any evidence that ad spending for either candidate is having an impact?
Ad spending is extremely inefficient in terms of what we want it to do. And that's just my opinion, but let me tell you why. In every election, we know some million of people are going to vote for one candidate, some million people are going to vote for the other candidate. These hundreds of millions of dollars that they're spending in these swing states are targeted at a tiny, tiny sliver of the population. And we're spending hundreds of millions of dollars to flip 2%. We're targeting that close. In the old days, before Citizens United and things like that, we were targeting, or ads tended to boost turnout. We were trying to get people to turn out. We were targeting the base and we were targeting swing voters. Now it's almost all about swing voters. It's almost all about getting that marginal advantage. So 2 or 3 points in an election. I mean, imagine the difference between winning a state by 3 and winning it or losing it by 1. That's only 4 points, but it makes all of the difference. So when one side is spending $100 million to target that 4%, then the other side has to counter it. It's kind of, there's a little bit of game theory and things involved with that. But both campaigns are spending a ton of money, and how they allocate their resources and who they're targeting will ultimately make a big difference in the outcome. I
skipped over this maybe 10 minutes ago, just quickly before I ask my last question.
Sure.
Did I hear you say that there are in this 2 weeks, we're trying to explain the 2-week shift, the blah, 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 blah. And you said there are actually more undecided voters now. Did I hear you say that?
There's a decent case that more voters state that they're undecided. There's various reasons for that. Number one is it could just be noise. It could be nonsense. It could just be a number that used to be 3% is now showing as 4%. It doesn't really mean anything. 1 or 2% in a poll is effectively nothing most of the time. So when my poll averages 3.5% undecided to 4.2% undecided, I don't read too much into that, except that maybe the pollsters are better targeting likely voters, or maybe they're not as good at targeting likely voters and they're getting more unlikely voters in their sample. I wouldn't look too much into that 1%.
Well,
movement.
peg that number. Just peg that number for me. What number would you put on undecided voters at this moment in time?
Voters who state that they're undecided, somewhere around 4%, depending on the state. Somewhere around 4%, depending on the state. Not all voters who state that they're undecided are truly undecided, but when someone says that they're undecided, you have to take them at their word.
Last question, Carl, and we'll start with Trump. Take Trump. Your biggest concern for Trump, and if you're Team Trump, your biggest concern and your biggest cause for optimism. Go.
Sure. Biggest concern for Trump is going to have to be the lack of countering to the abortion initiatives. In a lot of these swing states, abortion is on the ballot. In all of these swing states, the Senate candidates are running far ahead. The Senate races in many of these swing states do not look competitive. That is a huge red flag if you're trying to figure out where that last 3 to 4% of undecideds are going to go. Huge red flag.
Okay.
If I were looking at the favorables for Trump, his base is enormous. His base is going to turn out. He's going to get 47, 48, maybe 49% in all of these swing states. So he has a very high floor. Can Kamala Harris turn out her base, the Democratic base, the anti-Trump base, and then on top of that, convert enough swing voters to swing the election?
Okay.
Having a high floor is a good thing for electorally.
So Kamala Harris, your biggest for Team Harris, what's your biggest concern and your biggest cause for optimism at this point?
Biggest concern, just looking at the numbers, she's running behind Senate candidates in these swing states. That's not good, because you want your presidential candidate to be strong and you want them to pull, those coattails for the Senate candidates. When we see Slotkin and Cortez Masto and Gallego consistently polling 50 or above, and then Harris 2 or 3 points under them, that's a little bit of a concern. But that's also the cause for optimism, because when we see who these people are splitting tickets, are they more likely to ultimately come home for Harris or to continue splitting their ticket? In Arizona, I'm a little bit concerned. But in Michigan, in Nevada, in Pennsylvania, Bob Casey is polling in the 52, 53%, I believe, in my average. That's a very good sign for Harris if we're doing the job that I'm doing, and I'm trying to forecast how these undecided voters will eventually split.
That man, that voice, that man, that legend, and he's only 34 years old. You're so freaking young. Carl Allen, everybody, follow him. There's the book. The polls weren't wrong by Carl Allen. The polls weren't wrong. It's out. Go buy it. Follow Carl on Twitter at Real Carl Allen. At Real Carl Allen. That's Carl with a C. Carl, we're going to talk at the end of next week. You're the best. Thank you, brother.
Thanks again, Joe. Thanks for having me.
Everybody else, be brave. Be brave.
Remember to listen, share, and follow The Social Contract with Joe Walsh on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere great podcasts are found. And be sure to leave a 5-star review. This has been The Social Contract with Joe Walsh.